Welcome to Run, Build, Grow, the podcast that laces up its running shoes and dives deep into the heartbeat of the communal spirit of running. I'm your host, Andrew Ware, and I'm thrilled to take you on this exhilarating journey where we explore stories that go beyond the pavement. Here at the top, I would like to invite you to help to support this podcast, keep making it everything that it is, for everything that it can be. Make sure you are following or subscribing to this podcast on your favorite podcasting app, or you can find it online at communityrunpod.com. While you're over there online, head on over, click that link for Apple Podcasts or Spotify, even if you don't use them, and rate and review the podcast to help others notice how much you're enjoying it. And if you leave a review, I will read your reviews in the next episode. Make sure to share this podcast with your running community as we are all growing on the run and beyond. And I'd love it if you would help to support the podcast as I continue to grow this network. You can support it over on Buy Me a Coffee. Head on over to buymeacoffee.com/runandrev and help support the Run and Rev Run Club with either a monthly donation or just a one-time tip. You can do that if you love this episode or you love one of the previous episodes. You can leave just a one-time tip, or you can become a member and leave a monthly donation. I'm so grateful for those who are able to help out in that way and kind of keep the lights on here in the Run and Rev Run Club. And so for this episode, I have Kate Fletcher. Kate is a teacher in Louisa County, but Kate is also an ultra runner, but not your regular type of ultra runner. She's not running in a lot of ultra marathons and ultra races. She is doing crazy challenges to help to raise money for a scholarship for students in Louisa County High School. And this is great because she is not doing it for runners, but she is doing it as a runner, enduring hard things to help other students who have endured hard things, to help them be able to go to college, to help them be able to afford college. Now, we do talk about her challenge that she takes on this year. And for those of you here at the top, because I want to introduce it, to say that she did complete her challenge. She ran 40 miles from where she was in Louisa County, an old tavern, to Monticello to basically high five Thomas Jefferson. And so as you're listening to this episode and you hear Kate talking about the challenge that she is undertaking for the Lion Pride Run this year, you will hear her talk about it, hear her hype it up. And so I will say here at the top, she does complete this challenge, and you can go and check out the links in the show notes and see all the great fun that she had while doing it. And so this is such a great story of somebody using running, using what they have done in running to build community that helps beyond the run. And so let's dive into Kate's story. All right, welcome in, everybody. I am joined today by Kate Fletcher. Kate is a teacher in Louisa County, but even more so is probably one of the most insane runners I know. It is a pleasure to have Kate on. So Kate, how are you doing today?
I'm very well, thank you. Just winding down and tapering from my next crazy challenge.
Yeah, and so we're going to dive into that here in a minute. But what I want to get into first is where I like to start this podcast, which is, what is your community and what makes your community awesome?
So it's so hard for me to pick just one community. What if I have a community and a family?
It's all, that's all one. I think that's all one. It all plays into that community aspect for me.
Okay. Because I have my running communities in Richmond, which is the area I live in. And I would really say that I've got a trail running community and a road running community. I run with both MTT, the marathon training team, in the summer. And then in the winter, I run with a group called Virginia Capital Fitness. And those are my road running friends. And we're all back and forth between various road running groups, and they support me and keep me company on long, sweaty runs in the summer and long, cold runs in the winter. And the road runners keep a little bit of speed in my legs. I'm not a super fast runner by any means, but I'm afraid if I didn't do any road running, I would lose any speed that I have. So I cling desperately and spend a lot of time trying to keep up with faster runners than me as a way to maintain that speed as I get older and older and it gets harder and harder. And then I love trail running, and I have a bunch of trail running friends who I enjoy running with on the trails around the James River, but also going on day trips into the mountains, in the Charlottesville area and further west. So that's really what I consider my community of runners. And then I have a community or maybe family in Louisa County, which is really unique because I don't really run with my Louisa family, but every year I do a run in support of our graduating seniors to raise scholarship money for students who've had difficult times in their lives and been able to overcome their challenges to be really amazing students and human beings. And that run that I do to raise money is supported by this family of mine in Louisa County. And I've been teaching out here for about 20 years, almost 20 years. So I'm now teaching not quite the kids of kids, but that's around the corner, I'm sure, but certainly a lot of younger siblings and almost like generations of students in Louisa County come through my classroom, and they support me, by being the people I see every day, whether they're my actual colleagues or they're my students. And then on the day of the run and in the months leading up to the run every year, an enormous amount of support comes from this community. Teachers, students, in all kinds of really creative ways. Like the band always plays at my finish line. The culinary arts students always make the food I eat on whatever crazy trip I'm doing. Today, they're handing out all the t-shirts that were made. The students made special t-shirts for this year's run. I walked into a classroom yesterday and saw them with irons putting together these t-shirts, and those were distributed to teachers in every school in this county who wanted one. And then even the businesses in Louisa, the small businesses, are really our primary source of donations every year.
So yeah, and it's amazing to hear about all of those different communities, Kate, because really what you have done and what I've noticed is the way that running community, like you said, has met that Louisa community. I want to talk about this run. And when I say run, I mean, this is something that you've been doing for a number of years now. Can you lead us through this idea that you had for what you call the Lion Pride Run, this run that you do for these students that you love and care for so much in the Louisa school system?
Sure. This is actually the 8th year. We only skipped 1 year, which was the first year of the pandemic, not because I couldn't have run, although it would have been complicated to have all of the involvement that we normally have under those conditions, but also out of respect for the small businesses that do all support the run with donations for the scholarship fund. And it just seemed like a bad time to be asking for those donations from them. But with the exception of that year, this has been in place for 8 years. The very first run was actually when we moved into our new building at Louisa County High School. Not a lot of people know this, but our high school was destroyed by the earthquake. It was really under our building, as in the epicenter of that earthquake was in Mineral, Virginia, beneath our building.
Yeah.
And our school, I'll put it this way, we never walked inside that building again. And it took many years and many years of negotiations with FEMA to have a new school built for us. And so when we were finally in our new school, one of the ways we celebrated was with this idea of the run. I mean, there were many ways, I suppose, that we came together and celebrated not being in trailers anymore and having a normal school building and school day. But it was that year that another English teacher and I sat down together and thought, I wonder if we could do a fundraiser that involves me just running a lot, because it felt like something I could offer. And at that same time, I'd been thinking a lot about the level of commitment I would see from students who I knew were struggling in many ways, whether in school because of learning disabilities or at home because of an economic situation or a family situation, for all kinds of reasons. I think every teacher, probably all around the world and definitely in America, sees students who struggle. And the run, to me, felt like a way to show them that I was willing to struggle and feel pain and even be bored for hours at a time to overcome the challenges in my life in a symbolic way that could represent the challenges that they faced and that we had just faced as a community in losing our school and, making it through those years when we really didn't have a school. So that was the origin of the first run. It was based on the struggles of my students and then the struggles that we had as a community when we lost our building. And then that year, the first year, we had finally overcome a lot of that. And the run also seemed like a celebration. And I, at the time, had run the Richmond Marathon a few times, I believe, but I had never run more than 26.2 miles. So that first Lion Pride run, I just set my goal to run all day and see what would happen on the school track. And I ran approximately 40 miles that school day. And then each year for the next several years, I just added more miles until in 2018, I ran 100 miles around our dirt school track. And obviously that was an overnight endeavor. And again, the school community was amazing. There were kids who camped out overnight. And in fact, a documentary team came from Los Angeles and made a 10-minute documentary that year that was the beginning of a whole level of support from people, on the internet and in literally all over the world who saw that 10-minute documentary and donated to our GoFundMe site. So then we now had our Louisa small businesses and individuals that were getting to hear about the run and wanted to support from wherever they were. And then since then, I've done some more creative runs. Like there was a year I ran to every school in the school system, which was probably my favorite, and met kids at every school. And I if any teachers are listening, I do feel like that is doable in a lot of communities. If there's a runner who happens to be a teacher at a school in a county community, to make that trip from each school so that, I don't know if all the it depends obviously on the size of the county, but it felt at the time like it could be a little bit of a movement across America. I've never managed to convince anyone else, but it was just a lot of fun and brought the community together to run from one school to the next. And we have in total 5 schools. So it was within reason for me. Then I ran to Richmond from Louisa, which was a 50-mile run, and met with some politicians at the end of that run on the Capitol steps. Most recently, probably the most notable run was I ran from Louisa County High School to the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. And that was my longest. That was 105 miles. And then this year, if we could bring it to this year, I'm going to reenact a run that's famous in Louisa County, but it's not known as a run. It's known as a ride in Louisa County. And that's the historic ride of Jack Jewett to Monticello to warn Thomas Jefferson. This was in the 1700s, 1781 to be precise. Jack Jewett, who lived in Louisa, got on his horse, whose name was Sally, and Jack and Sally rode 40 miles through the night to warn Thomas Jefferson that the British were coming to capture him. And if they hadn't done that, if Jack and his horse Sally had not been able to warn Thomas Jefferson, he might never have become the president, because this was actually before his presidency. And in Louisa, kids learn this. We even have an elementary school called Jack Jewett Elementary. So it's a really fun run for me to take something that they're all learning about in school and to reenact it. But instead of riding a horse, I like to say I am the horse. Doing all the running. I've been secretly calling myself Sally. I'm doing all the running, and I will eventually get to Monticello on Tuesday, March 26th. And apparently the staff over there at Monticello has a Thomas Jefferson waiting for me, who I suppose I'll probably high five. I don't know if the real Jack Jewett would have high fived Thomas Jefferson, but it'll be nice to finally get there. And there'll be kids there waiting for me as well, including a lot of elementary school students.
Yeah. And so listeners, as you're hearing this, Kate is with this run. I hope it's coming out on Friday. And so as you're getting ready, you're in the final stages of getting ready for this run, especially this year, what does that training look like for you? What does it look like to train for something like this?
I guess to me, this is normal training, which I know might sound strange to a shorter distance, faster runner. But really, I don't run races, for instance, shorter than marathons. That's just not my distance. Or like a 10K or a 5K, I would prefer not to run that fast. I think of those as vomiting distances, because if you run them as you should, you definitely feel a little bit sick. So I'd rather take my time and run a marathon or even longer. So I've gotten into the habit of regularly going on 30-mile runs. I spent much of my summer last year going out to a place called Jarman's, which I don't know if listeners would know or not know. Probably some do. And every week I would do at least a 30-miler on Jarman's. I just pick a day. And of course, I'm very fortunate that I have summers off as a teacher. So it was usually just a random work day and I just cover 30 miles. Honestly, just for fun, really, because I wasn't training at that point for this run. So I suppose, my answer would just be that I'm regularly covering 30-mile distances, which means that to run a 40-mile distance, which is this run coming up, is 40 miles from the starting point, which is the old location of a tavern in Louisa where Jack Jewett was when he overheard the British. From that location of a tavern to Monticello, 40 miles. It just maybe requires a little bit more focus in the last month or two. I've done about 6 weeks of solid training, including some weekends where I did a 30-miler on Saturday and then another longer run on Sunday. So I feel ready. And also, it's not a race. So the pace there's no pressure for me to go really fast at all in any way, which is one of the reasons I prefer doing this event to actually racing. It's nice to let go of that pressure.
Yeah. And so you talk about when this started of wanting an opportunity to give something back, especially to the students that you see throughout the schools, knowing Louisa County schools and knowing some folks in Louisa County. It doesn't function like a lot of school districts in some of the bigger cities because once you start getting higher, there's one high school in the entire county. And so, all the elementary schools, all the middle schools, they feed into this one high school. So there's a very much communal sense of everything that's kind of feeding in up to this high school. And so there's a big community around where you do have a chance to kind of teach, from the youngest kids in elementary school to the older kids up in high school through this run. And especially as you're, interacting with the whole school district as a whole as well. And so when you think about, and when you were, I guess, wrestling with your way of giving back, and you noticed sort of this proficiency for running, as some of us might call it, for running long distances, what became the connection to really start to use that? Because the money that you raise from this run, and to be clear to listeners, it is a fundraising run. It goes towards scholarships for some of these seniors going to college. And so what became that connection? And then what's the connection that you hold on to with these seniors who are receiving this scholarship?
So maybe I'll answer the second part of that first. The connection that we hold on to, I think this is what you mean, is that they continue to support the Lion Pride Run. We hear from them all the time. I feel like those students who've received the scholarship, maybe even more than other seniors, have a tendency to reach out to the school. I'll get a letter or an email or a message on Facebook even from former students. And it might be a student that I actually taught, or it might be someone that wasn't a student of mine personally, but received the scholarship, telling me about their lives, updating me. It's almost like a community at this point of kids who have graduated and received that scholarship, who, at least in my mind, maybe they don't necessarily communicate amongst each other, but in my mind, they're a community of kids that are, obviously close to my heart because they were the recipient. Then to become a recipient of the scholarship, they either have to write an essay that explains to us what they've overcome to get to where they are, or they have to have an interview. I think of it as like the extrovert's interview or the introvert's essay, because usually the ones that don't want to sit in a room and talk to grown-ups about their lives choose the essay, and the ones who enjoy explaining themselves in person choose the interview.
But these are also not, they're not runners. These are not like track athletes.
No.
These are not like track athletes that you're supporting. These are students who are, they've maybe heard of Lion Pride Run, or they've heard of the scholarship, and they're applying for this. So this is not like specifically dedicated to runners. This is just for any students that are looking for financial help. And I think, that I just wanted to lift that up here.
Yeah. And I forget sometimes that it would be a natural assumption to think that it was a scholarship for athletes. But really, and maybe this helps to illustrate the point. I'm an English teacher. So yes, I'm a runner, but I spend all day, every day being an English teacher. And I can't help but think in metaphors. Like, I think that's been true of me my whole life. It's probably why I became an English teacher. So the run is entirely metaphorical.
Mm-hmm.
It really is meant to symbolize the student, the young person who has overcome challenges, climbed hills, gone deep into some valleys, found their way out, kept going despite boredom, hardship, pain, right, in their lives, and managed to get to where they are on the precipice of their high school graduation with a sense of what they've accomplished. And it's also not a scholarship for the kind of kid that sometimes people imagine when they imagine a scholarship. This isn't really for I played 4 sports and got a 4.6 GPA. They do need to be good students, and they need to have a plan. We've given it to both students going to college, either a community college or a 4-year university, but also to trade schools. So instead of looking for exemplary students who are incredibly well-rounded, we are really trying to find those students who have had significant challenges in their lives that they've overcome. That's the particular embodiment that we want to go out into the world and represent the run. Yeah.
And I think that becomes important because as we talk about running, as we talk about community, a lot of times we can get sort of tunnel vision where once you're in the running community, that's kind of the community that you're supporting. And I think that definitely through your episode here and then the episode that we had on last week with Robin Telfian and Shude is there's also ways that we as runners can use what we love to offer something back to the community and to take that story of the earthquake in Mineral and the kind of the center of Louisa County, so to say, and using that story, that understanding of hardship, of fighting back, of coming back, and then now to use something that you're good at in running and combining that with your love for these students, your love for teaching, your love for education to help these students be able to do something. And so you talked early on at the beginning of this episode when you talked about community, about the Richmond running community and running with them, running with Marathon Training Team, all that stuff. What does it look like? How much do you seek to involve the Richmond running community? Do you bring them in? Do you have friends in that running community who help to support this in order to support some of these students that are trying to do amazing things?
So I will say every year there have been running friends of mine who've donated to the GoFundMe page. And I have to give a shout out to a man named Frankie Gerloff, who's a Richmond coach. And he's the head coach of the Virginia Capital Fitness team that I run with. And he encouraged this year, especially anyone on our team to check out what this run is all about. And obviously then they were open to consider whether they wanted to make a donation. And an amazing number of my teammates made donations. I have honestly been looking for them on the streets because the season is really over and I haven't seen most of them. But I want to give a bunch of people a big hug and say thank you so much for being incredibly generous. Because I think we're all, I don't know, bombarded is a strong word, but I think we're to some extent bombarded with all kinds of requests for support, especially financial. And if you've ever given to GoFundMe, you will forever get messages from GoFundMe asking you to consider this cause or that cause. And the fact that some of my running friends who, really are people I see running, but don't necessarily see outside of running, for them to take the time to make that kind of donation, it was really touching to me. And if any of them are listening, I'm going to find you and give you a hug and tell you a thank you in person because it really meant a lot to me. And then there are all kinds of runners in Richmond that know about my run and are just full of support whenever they see me. We're, just the friendly, hey, what are you doing this year? Are you doing something crazier than last year? Pretty much everyone I know in Richmond as a runner knows about my Lion Pride run and regularly asks about it and, genuinely listen. They genuinely want to know. They're always very interested and supportive. I should also say, actually, over the years, many people have asked if they could run with me. If the answer could be yes, I would have had dozens of runners with me all the way to DC, to every school. And the years actually on the track, there were people who were able to come and run with me because I was on the track. But when I have done runs on the roads, I'm escorted by the Louisa Sheriff's Department. And understandably, they can't take on the liability of other people. It's enough to kind of keep their eyes on me all night, or, in the case of going to DC, that was more than 24 hours. So I always have to say, thank you, but I'm so sorry. I have to do this alone whenever it's on the roads.
And so, I mean, wow, let's dive into that for a minute, because especially thinking, so, this year's run, you said it was 40 miles?
Yes.
And, doing it mostly alone. So, I mean, what's going through your mind as you're running? I mean, I take it you're not, trying to pick up conversations with the police officers who are escorting you, right?
No, actually, I am. No, I don't. No, because they're driving often right beside, almost right beside me. And then in the back of the car will be, and I need to give her a huge shout out, because honestly, we're a 2-person team. There's an organizer of the run who's also an English teacher and a friend of mine for many years, Meredith Williamson. And she teaches a class of students called the leadership class, who do all the organizing for the run. They do all of the fundraising in terms of going into the community and sharing the run with small businesses and asking for support. And then on the day of the run, Meredith goes into the back of the police car. And sometimes actually in the past, even a student or two has been in the back of the police car. And then they just talk to me through the window much of the time. So I'm completely spoiled. This is not like Badwater or something. I'm just running down the side of the highway, a police car right next to me. They're passing me like, Kate, do you want a banana? Do you need a gel? Here's your water. I don't even actually have to hold my own water bottle. So as a runner who, I've done the Richmond Marathon, I know what a real race is like. You got your little tiny cups, you're just trying to survive. Maybe you see a friend or family member on the course somewhere and they give you a high five, but mostly you're alone with the sounds of random people in huge crowds, and that can lift your spirits up, but it can also kind of be overwhelming. But for the Lion Pride run, I really have the best of all possible situations. I have peace and quiet if I want it, and they can just hand me my music. But if I want to chat, they'll chat. And actually, the officer who escorts me is always the same one, a man named Chuck Love. And I think he really enjoys doing this, to be honest. And his son is a very, very fast marathon runner.
Okay.
So he and I, over all these years, have become friends, and we'll chat down many a country road. And then actually he'll pull over, and I'll use one of my favorite stretches is to kind of hang my hands on an open window of the car, and then, stretch out as much as I can using the vehicle to support me. Yeah, I'm very spoiled.
Well, and that's great, because I think, it goes to show that, you're doing something that is giving to the community, and that it isn't just, Kate Fletcher, Mrs. Fletcher, whatever they call you, doing it on her own, and not even just, people only donating, but the fact that you also have the support crew that's coming and helping you along the way. Because I think, folks remember when I talked to John back, and we talked a lot about ultra and trail running, part of that support is the crew that helps you get to the finish line. And obviously it's a completely different beast to do some of these non-traditional distance kind of things. And following these journeys for a lot of people, it's not just the runner on the road, but it's the police officer that's driving next to you, the person who's in the side seat or the back seat who's helping with motivational support, the person who can toss out the goo or the headphones for just the time. Yeah. And so, it's, you kind of made the comment earlier about what community are we talking about here where, and the cool thing about this idea, this run, build, grow idea, I think is that, there's a lot of different places that we do get community from. And it's how that community kind of helps to support us as we're coming along the way and what they're doing. And so as as we're looking at them, each of the Line Pride runs have been something very different. And you kind of mentioned that earlier. You talked about the year that you ran to Richmond and to the state capitol and kind of did some advocacy there. You talked about the time you ran to Washington, D.C., ran to the Lincoln Memorial. You talked about just running the track for tons of miles, which I have to give up to you because I don't even want to do speed works on the track now.
Yeah.
You talk about running from school to school to school across the county. Does any, and this might sound like a weird question. I'm not asking you to pick a favorite child, but are there any, is there one run that stands out, or are there moments from a few of the years that really stand out to you as you reflect back, especially when, it even could be like, this year meant a lot to me, even because of some of the students that received the scholarship, but even also the run itself. Was there something impactful about the run?
Yeah, I would say that probably my favorite run was the one where I ran to each school. And I realized, by the way, my math was incorrect. My math was incorrect earlier. I said there were 5 schools. There are 6. We have 4 elementary schools. So the run was a little bit longer. There were 4 elementary schools, a middle school and a high school in Louisa. That run was very special to me because the year before I had done 100 miles on the track. And so the kids, even the littlest kids, had learned about the Line Pride run. They'd heard about, there's a crazy teacher at the high school who ran really far. And so when I went to each school, I didn't just run past, I actually would run into the building. So someone would have the door open and I'd run into the building and then I'd run down the halls. At one school, I ran into the cafeteria and there were kids kind of standing on their chairs, like waving soup spoons, cheering. I remember at one of the elementary schools, there were kids playing on the paint, on the buckets, playing drums on buckets. So it was just a really, honestly, this is a silly sounding word, but a very cute experience to see all those tiny kids. I work at the high school, so I'm working with basically young adults. And to see all these much younger children getting so excited and being kids about it and high-fiving me and wanting to come up and give me a hug was really special to me. And it was the first time I felt how much it was a run for the whole community and not just for the high school, even though, yes, the scholarship goes to a graduating senior, but those seniors started as little kids at one of those 4 elementary schools.
Yeah.
And worked their way through the school system. So that was probably my favorite, but you're absolutely right. There have been highlights of every run. I'd say the pain highlight was definitely the run to DC, which was over 100 miles. I was in a great deal of pain. There's really no way to make that sound easy because it absolutely wasn't. And students will sometimes ask me, didn't that hurt? And I don't try to deny it. It did hurt.
Yeah.
It hurt a lot. And I really wanted to quit. So that's actually been a really good conversation. A conversation I have in my head about quitting. And we all know for runners, it's so easy to forget how bad it was. And then when you're back in it, you're like, oh man, here it is again. But it's also a good conversation to have with my students sometimes about how hard things can get. And again, of course, I'm speaking metaphorically. I'm not speaking about them as runners. I'm speaking about them as students and human beings. It's really a run that kind of represents, it went to a pretty dark place for me to get all the way to the Lincoln Memorial. And it was a very hilly run too. I actually did not own a watch when I did that run. So I don't know the elevation gain, but I definitely think it was somewhere in the 20 to 30,000 feet of elevation gain range would be my best guess. I also learned the hard way that pavement is going to take a very large toll on your legs after 100 miles. There's a reason that most 100-milers are on trails.
Yeah.
There are many reasons, but pavement hurts. It really, really hurts. And yet, of course, the more pain, the more difficulty, the greater the challenge. Of course, the reward feels even more fulfilling, to have made it to that finish line. And once again, of course, there were students from the high school and from all the elementary schools waiting for me at the Lincoln Memorial. And that was incredibly powerful for me. And then just to continue with the last part of this question, there are always students every year who get the scholarship that I will never forget. Some of them I've taught, and so I kind of already knew about their lives, and others I just meet when they apply. But we've given it to so many amazing students. We gave one to a refugee. We've given them to students who are in foster care, to students with severe learning disabilities, to students who've just faced all of the hardships that, I would say that we as a society understand exist, and some of us as adults have faced, but it's a whole other thing to imagine a young person going through some of the things that are really difficult for fully grown people with a really intact support system. Yeah.
Yeah. And then those are the ones that I'm sure also are being thought of, on that 100-mile run when you are tired and you just want to be done. And, I can think of how those stories kind of come up and they well up with inside you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I've always wondered, how did regular 100-milers do it? Because I don't think I could just do it for my own sake. I think I would easily find reasons to quit. So I really admire people who can run a 100-mile distance without this feeling of responsibility to, another group of people. But obviously most 100-mile runners go out there and are able to tackle that and find a way to get through it and overcome all of those desires to quit that I just assume come with the territory. So it is doable. I actually did attempt a 100-miler on Germans this past summer. And one of the reasons I didn't make it, so I just say that straight up, but I wanted to see if I could do it just for myself. I actually wanted to see if I could have that much of a belief in myself and put that much importance in that kind of accomplishment for myself. And I'm afraid to say I fell short by quite a bit. I did get past the 50-mile mark, but at a certain point, and this is going to sound really small, but I cannot explain how much they hurt. My toes started to hurt so badly.
Oh, gosh.
I think it's the downhill. I think my toes were, banging up against the front of my shoe for 54 miles. And they began to almost sting in an unbearable way. But again, if I had been running up and down Germans for my students, I would not have seen quitting as an option. I'm not sure what I would have done, but I would have kept going. Yeah.
What a great story. And friends, I'm going to drop that GoFundMe link to Lion Pride Run here. And so I guess not this year, but does it stay open throughout the year?
It does. Yes. The GoFundMe page is open all year. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So when you're listening to this, Kate will have finished her run, and I'll make sure to try and include it in the intro, how it went. So send me a message when you finish.
Okay.
When you finish, that way I'll include it in the intro, but I'll include the link for y'all to be able to donate if you want to donate to Lion Pride Run. This great thing helps some of these awesome students. But Kate, before we wrap up here, let's get some of these end of podcast questions.
Okay.
So you're running some untraditional distances and you're doing these Lion Pride runs, but what is your favorite distance to race?
Oh man. I guess I would say something longer than a marathon.
Okay.
Really pretty much anything longer than a marathon. Because a marathon is my shortest distance that I ever race, I haven't raced something shorter than a marathon in many, many years. So when I do run, and it's always the Richmond Marathon, I don't like to travel for these things.
Fair enough.
When I do race the Richmond Marathon, I feel as if I have to go as absolutely fast as I possibly can for that distance. And if I just go up to a 50K or, I've done a 40-mile race called the Odyssey 40-miler. I've done the Masochist 50-miler. I've done a bunch of 50K races. And as soon as I cross into that distance, especially if the race is on a trail, I let go of that level of competition and drive that I feel at the Richmond Marathon.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as my feet touch forest trail, I tap into something else that really isn't about competition and speed. So that's why I prefer the longer distances, because they don't cause the level of, honestly, and this is a shout out to marathon runners, road runners. I truly don't believe that trail runs cause the level of suffering and pain that marathon running does. Because people often ask me, isn't a 50K harder than 26.2 miles, which is a logical question. But what my response is always, but if you're doing a 50K, you're probably on a trail and the roots and the rocks are going to slow you down automatically. And so speed is going to be less of a factor. Mm-hmm. And therefore, enjoyment will probably increase and you'll probably you might find it to be actually easier. Yeah.
All right. So normally I ask, what is your favorite thing to eat post-run? But let's do it this way. What's that first thing you're going to eat when you get to Monticello?
That's really
what you looking for?
Gosh, I would have to pack it ahead of time unless they have it in the gift shop. Some kind of colonial sandwich. I do really like a Chipotle burrito, but I'm a vegetarian, so I'm talking to beans basically. The culinary arts kids make me what they call a Fletcher bar, which is a lot like a Cliff Bar. And I always tell the chef that teaches that class, we just call him chef. I always tell chef, can you make some extras? Because invariably, I eat them all through the run, but I actually love them so much. I'm not just saying this to advertise for I often honestly reach for a post-run Fletcher bar soon after the run. But probably at some point I will want a normal meal and I will not want to be the one who has to make it. And so, yeah, a Chipotle bean burrito, not a bowl, I need the bread, is probably my go-to.
Okay. So what is the most interesting thing to happen to you on the run?
On a run for my school?
Just any run. I mean, I'm sure you got stories in both categories.
Gosh, I'm sure I do. Probably as soon as we hang up, I'll think of something else. But when I ran to DC in Manassas, I had to run through an entire construction site that was technically closed down because it was the middle of it was probably 2 a.m. or something. So it wasn't like there was active machinery, but there were like piles of asphalt and all kinds of cinder blocks and debris and huge holes in the road. And so that was probably the craziest obstacle course I've ever had to go through on a run. Because, we're used to, if we've ever done one of those fun runs that has an obstacle course, but you sign up for that, it's coming. I didn't expect to spend a mile or two, like, trying not to fall in a huge asphalt pit in the dark on a run.
All right. And then final question, why should someone find and join their local running group for a run?
I would say because you never know where it's going to lead. When I became a runner at 35, so 15 years ago, I just went down to my local track, literally a children's, like an elementary school track, which I still do a lot of running at. I went down to this track down the street and I just thought I was going to run a few laps to see how long it took me to get out of breath. I had no idea that within a few years I would run marathons. I had no idea that I would find a way to connect my running, which I love, with teaching, which I love, and to bring those two sides of my life together in this really powerful way that the Lion Pride Run does. I couldn't see any of that in the future. I think a lot of people don't want to start something until they know the end result. And it's understandable, right? We all like to plan and to know and decide if it's worth it based on the end result that we're imagining. And I guess I would just say, go and run with your local run group because you have no idea where this might lead you, not just physically in your running, but in all aspects of your life.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Kate, for coming on. This was a great conversation. Again, we'll follow up to see how this all went. Kate will let me know when you're listening to this. But Kate, you have a good day. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks for joining, and remember, make every mile count.